All right, that should have worked. Ah! Can you hear me now? um, awesome. Thank you, Jared. So the reason that happened, I know 100%. I have been on calls all day long. I've been on Zoom, and I'm sure Zoom, even though it shut down, messed around with my audio settings. It's, if it's not one thing, it is another. So anyway, as I was saying, we are just going to read today. Today's going to be a bit of a short get together because I have got AQSG winter virtual seminar. It starts tonight. We have our welcome reception. And it's open to everybody. It's open to the public. It is free. If you would like to come, let me throw a link in. Ugh. Let's see. Where? Well, I had the website up. Hashgal, if this is a sign of all things today, right? But if you are interested in coming to our event tonight, you just need to register for it, so that we know you're coming, because we've had some challenges in the past with weirdos sneaking in and showing porn. So we're always careful with the registration. Anyway, that starts tonight, and I have been one of the primary volunteers in putting it together. So yeah, got a lot of loose ends to deal with between tonight, tomorrow, and our study center sessions start on Saturday and Sunday. They are a lot of fun. I'm very excited for our speakers this year. Some of them are sort of longtime AQSG members that, they kind of have their bag of badgers that they like to bring out, and their wonderful quilt collections and the things that they teach. Carolyn Gibbs is actually going to be teaching one, and I'm really excited for hers. I'm actually going to sit in on hers. But you guys may have heard Word and Bird Nerd and our friend Padma mention Carolyn's classes. I guess they've been taking I think some kind of like sort of long-term class with her. So she's going to be speaking. She's a member of the British Quilt Study Group, and I met her in person just this past year. So I'm really excited to have her. And then, I mean, the others are also fantastic. They're all people, for the most part, that I've heard speak, and it's going to be a really fun event. But as one of the primary people of responsibility with this event, the loose ends will kill you. So anyway, enough about that. I'm just going to read today because we have given Elizabeth Wells Robertson not enough love. No. Y'all voted on wanting to hear her first before we bounced over to Avril Colby and her book. So I wanted to get through, because I feel like I pick up the book all the time, and I've done very little reading. It's dense text, in my defense. But I thought that, we'll do this for an hour. Of course, this is the day I picked to do this, and I've been talking nonstop for a couple hours now. So wish my voice luck. So I was originally going to do the second part of the community outreach quilts at QuiltCon, and we'll still look at those probably on Monday. Yeah, I knew that was going to take me like like this past Monday. I really thought there would be time to read, and of course I can't power through pictures of quilts. So so today we're gonna get caught up with Elizabeth Robertson. So, as a reminder, what we are reading is American Quilts by Elizabeth Wells Robertson, published in 1948. It's a fairly slim volume. It's a larger book, slim volume. I have the dust jacket is in really bad shape. I need to do some stuff to just conserve it. But she has a lot of really interesting stuff in this book, and she was actually a teacher in Chicago. She was an art teacher, and she did a lot of stuff for children's art kind of stuff. She herself was a quilt maker and artist. So she's kind of an interesting character. And, I still don't know a whole lot about her other than, just the little bits and pieces I've picked up. Don't think she ever married. Um, but she made news during the Depression because there was a pictures taken at, I believe it was in Minneapolis. There were pictures taken at a Department of Education summit or something. And so she ended up in the newspaper because her contingent from Chicago brought their own lunches because food was not provided because it was the Depression. So they made a big deal about the fact like they had not been paid in an astronomical amount of time. I'm like, we're talking like school teachers were teaching for free essentially for almost an entire school year. So she made a little bit of buzz about that, but then pretty much all of her other notoriety was about quilting and the stuff that the creative stuff she was doing within the school system, and often bringing quilting in on that. Cops coming by. By the way, to sidetrack here, I know we always talk about the weather a little bit. Y'all, I don't know what is going on with the weather here in the Mid-Atlantic. They said we were going to get a cold front. So I knew the weather was like the temperature was going to plummet a little bit. I walked outside at 11 o'clock to get my mail. Now we're just talking a couple hours ago here. I knew it was a little chilly, but it was snowing. And at that point it was not sticking because like we'd had rain all night long. But when I just looked out right before I started the stream, I think it has stuck. Like we've gotten it's just just a little blanket of snow. It's not much. It's just a little covering, but what? I just was not expecting snow today. And Jill keeps taunting me about false spring. And I'm like, no, spring is here. It's just being a wacky spring. Anyway, so back to Elizabeth Wells Robertson. So we have been in section 2. We're just getting ready to end that. I have one more little bit to read from this section. I think it's like 3 pages. And then we will move on to, I'm sorry, this is part 3. We'll move on to part 4, which is about sources of design. So let's go ahead and get started. So we are reading American Quilts by Elizabeth Wells Robertson, published in 1948. We're in part 3, and we're going to start with hand painting and printing on cotton. Some of the hand-painted fabrics combined the old resist dye process. This is well described in A Brief Guide to the Oriental Painted, Dyed, and Printed Textiles, published by the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. And these, A Brief Guide to, are something that I think the V&A published a lot back in the day. I know in Dr. Dunton's collection, he's got several of these little pamphlets or little booklets. I know I have one that I got a reprint of. So this was something that they published, and it would just be like little bits and pieces, like kind of from the curator about their collection. So it's kind of interesting. So this is what she says. A resist is a substance, such as a wax or clay, which is applied to certain parts of a fabric before dipping it into the dye vat. The resist protects the parts covered against absorption of the dye. It is impossible to name the date or the place of the origin of resist dyeing. There are early indications that it was used in Peru, India, China, Japan, and most of all in Java. The Javanese used an elaborate process of resist dyeing called batik. And we're all very we know batik. Like you don't have to explain what batik is for the most part. People, even quilters, non-quilters know what batik is. Druid says, it was on this date in 93 of the infamous blizzard of 93. It's not spring until it's spring and then it's snowing, right? Now, I don't remember, gosh, 93. I was in college in 93. That was probably the winter I started dating my husband, honestly. And I do remember on the East Coast, we probably didn't get the rough snow you might have gotten there. Storm of the century. See, for the East Coast, the storm of the century was 1996. That was the really bad one in the Mid-Atlantic, I think all the way up north of us, and even down into, I was on my honeymoon in Louisiana. when 1996 was the snowpocalypse. I think they called it. Yeah, 93 was the storm of the century because 96 hadn't happened yet. Um, yeah, so yeah, these snowstorms, like, you forget about them until something kind of triggers your memory, right? It's so funny. Well, hopefully this is just a little blip and it doesn't stick around because I am very much ready for spring. I can't take any more of this wet and snow and stuff. It's not even like we've had that much. It's just been everyone has just bombarded us. Anyway, so batik, we know what it looks like. We've seen it. But it's interesting to me to think about all of these other cultures that were using like a resist type of dyeing and fabric decoration, textile decoration. Because the batik is wax and it's crumpled. So it's got all those little lines in it that are, come from cracking the wax before they dye it. But all of these other, places were doing similar things, but, the way that they dyed and I guess, applied the resist and worked with the resist, you don't necessarily get that exact like batik look with all cultures. So kind of interesting to me. Um, 1 month later, Druid, I remember when I was in college. I mean, I can like very like vividly remember, getting snow one day and then like several days later everybody's out in shorts and tank tops and vice versa. People are out in shorts and tank tops and then like 2 days later it snows. I think we just deal with this in the US, parts of the US, and we just when we talk about it every year, we're like, "Oh my god. I was just wearing a parka yesterday and today I had to put on a tank top because I'm sweating." I just feel like this is like this swath of like the center of our country deals with this. And we always act surprised. And then it happens every year. Okay, so the way that the batik is done is the pattern is traced on both sides of the material in melted beeswax, which is held in liquid form in a little vessel with a spout called the janting. And I don't know if that's the right pronunciation, but this little thing it's spelled TJANTING, a janting. And what it looks like is it looks kind of like a paintbrush, but instead of, your bristles being pressed into this like collar thing, the collar thing actually forms like a little pot, and the bottom of it has like a little bitty tube, and it's made out of like brass. And I actually have one. I have no idea where it is. I could not for the life of me even think about where it might be stored away, but and then and they've put some beeswax pellets in there, and they're basically holding it over a flame to get, just this metal part. They're holding it over a flame to melt that, and then they're touching the fabric with this little nozzle almost, and the fluid beeswax will come through there. It's pretty amazing how it works. I feel like the one I have is probably not the super nice version, like, or the professional version, like the real batikers use. Or maybe it's just I didn't use it often enough. It's a little clunky, a little hard to work with, but I've seen video of artists, batik artists and similar types of artists laying down this resist, and they do it very quickly and very efficiently. So I think it's one of those things when you've got the experience, it just, goes down. But I'm trying to think if I had anything in my, I don't even have a paintbrush in my random implements here, but yeah, I'll have to drag that out sometime because I could picture it in my head. But it's hard to describe if you've never seen one, right? Um, okay. Druid's got a canting, canting. Okay. I wonder if that has, maybe it's because I have not been pronouncing it right. A chanting or a canting. So it's a Javanese pen-like tool used in batik to apply hot, melted wax to fabric, creating intricate wax-resistant designs. Small, thin copper reservoir, and the one I have is brass, I think. It's not copper colored. With one or more spouts and a wooden bamboo handle, typically coming in fine, medium, and large sizes. So yeah, it's just imagine like a little kind of teeny little pot, sort of, with a little nozzle coming out of it, and then coming out of the side of it, the handle is like a paintbrush handle. and they kind of hold it in a way that is almost like writing with a writing with a paintbrush, because that's kind of what they're doing. So she goes on to say, parts of the cloth which were intended to be left white or to receive another color were covered with wax. It is pretty amazing. Some of these textiles, they would cover very large parts of the textile with wax. I am always thinking of it in terms of like, tie-dye and batik and things like that. But some of the chintz fabrics that were created this way, they were like blocking out really large sections. And that's really amazing to me because that takes a lot of work. And then you got to get the wax out. That's a whole nother thing. She says the cloth bearing its wax coating is steeped in a dye vat and the wax is afterward removed. The process is repeated for each color required. Sometimes the wax cracks while in the dye vat, causing little lines or veins to appear, somewhat like a crackle glaze in old Chinese pottery. Hand painting on cotton had its biggest success in India, and a great vogue was created for these pieces in all parts of the world. It is believed that these gay fabrics first found their way to the Fair of Saint Germain in 1658. This is new. This is new intel. The Fair of Saint Germain. I'm guessing that's in France. They were extremely popular among those who could afford them, and some ambitious French designer then conceived the idea of producing such cottons not by the tedious method of hand painting each one separately, but by means of printing many of the same design from hand-carved wood blocks. That's interesting. I don't know that I've ever heard of that, like going from painting on fabric to printing on fabric as coming about in 1658 at this fair. Woodblock printing. This idea of woodblock printing proved a success, and workshops in several provinces in France began to produce cottons printed in this manner. Though lacking the characteristic charm of the Orientals, they were delightful and colorful nonetheless, and women of ordinary means bought them for their dresses, bedroom curtains, and bedspreads. These cottons, characteristically Indian in color and design, were called Indiennes, and that would be spelled the French way, Indiennes, again, like from India. Soon they became so popular that the manufacturers of silk, velvet, tapestry, and other materials in France were forced to declare themselves bankrupt and sought the help of the government. I think we remember some of this, and I don't know that there was so much information about France, but we know that England was definitely facing some of this. I think we read the Chintz book and the Heritage of Cotton. The authors talked about this stuff. Lots of people were mad. The wool production was like, get this cotton and its woodblock printing away from us. The result was that laws were enacted which not only prohibited the importation of Indian fabrics, but also closed all woodblock printing workshops in France. The Edict of October 26, 1686, ordered the destruction of all blocks used in printing and prohibited the sale of all printed cottons, whether they were Indian importations or French reproductions. It further authorized that all printed fabrics found in shops be burned and the merchants heavily fined. As a result of this, many who had worked in this craft were driven away from the country, but not all. The feminine desire for lovely fabrics was not to be thwarted, and as the demand became greater than ever, printing was continued in secret warehouses. Now, I can't remember if this was in the Chintz book by MacGyver Percival, Percival MacGyver. I always get his name wrong. And then, the Heritage of Cotton guy. Actually, I think he's quoted in here, so she's got him in the bibliography. Where is he? Oh, goodness, where is he? He should be right here. Crawford. Maurice de Camp Crawford. That's right. Crawford was the Heritage of Cotton. So I think we heard these stories in one of those books. And where she's saying here that feminine desire for lovely fabrics, I remember the other two authors, one of them saying that, even though there was this, these laws, basically they're sumptuary laws for all intents and purposes, and they're, trying to maintain the local craft and textile, s- you know, arts and crafts. But the rich people will get what they want. They're going to get like black market stuff that's imported, or they're going to get the local, the reproduction stuff, black market. And then people in the middle, like your middle class people, the merchants' wives and such, they'll get their hands on something, probably a reproduction, or something like secondhand. And then the lowest, class of people never had never had the ability to get these things in the first place. Nothing changes for them. So, this people always find their ways around laws. In England, the story was much the same as it had been in France. Painted Indian cottons became extremely fashionable. As early as 1831, the East Indian Company was granted permission to import satins, taffetas, and painted calicos into England. Then later, the painted Indian cottons became extremely fashionable among the elite, with the result that money was poured into the East India Company instead of being earned by manufacturing companies at home. To protect the domestic manufacture of prints, an act was passed in 1700 which banned the importation of all decorated cottons from the East Indies, Persia, and China. The agitation against the use of printed cotton reached an all-time high in 1722 when an act was passed prohibiting the use of all decorated cottons. This was brought about by the workers in wool and silk who had become extremely jealous and fearful that their own businesses might be ruined. So it's like a sumptuary law stacked on top of the local trade, that didn't want disruption. Much later, ambitious and enterprising manufacturers in England and also in France were permitted to set up print works to imitate the beautiful painted India cottons. In England in 1770, Sir Robert Peel, we know his name, founded a company at Bury in Lancashire and made many prints, especially for the American trade. And right there at the end of the 1700s, early 1800s, this stuff for the American trade also included like their chintz prints that they were like, meh, these are seconds, dump them on the Americans. And that was when it was right when all of the importation, the embargoes of the Revolutionary War kind of were lifted, and trade was starting to happen with England again. And therefore, they were like, okay, trade's opened up. Let's dump some crap on them. So, Sir Robert Peel, what was he up to? One good example, so these were prints made for the American trade. One good example of this is the copper plate called Penn's Treaty with the Indians. Indeed, England made some very creditable prints which paralleled in an interesting way the patterns found in the Liverpool porcelainware of that time. Interesting. English women of the period took great pride in their calicos, both for dresses and for furniture coverings. The brilliancy of the color, the fineness of the weave, the fastness of the dye, and the beauty of the designs were all matters of great concern. In her book, Weaves and Draperies, Helen Churchill Candy wrote that all France and all England flowered like a June garden, and the cottage interior became as gay as Madame's boudoir. All honor to the venturesome little ships that sailed east and brought home a beauty which inspired the development of one of the world's greatest industries. Silk had furnished houses and dressed the persons of the rich for centuries, but homespun linen and wool had been the apparel of the cottages. It is not difficult to imagine the happiness which the gaily flowered cotton fabrics gave the women of the time for their homes and their own attire. So yeah, this is the time period, the industrial, like early industrial revolution, and this kind of stuff it's creating that middle class is, doing some stuff now. And, they're able to keep up with the Joneses a little bit more now that we've got these manufacturing, even though people are trying to stop it, we've got this manufacturing going on. toile. And I know, I still to this day, I don't know how you pronounce this properly. Toile de joie, toile de joie, toile de joie. I don't know. I don't know how to speak French. um, but there, you guys know what I'm talking about, toile. So, of all of the various manufacturers of printed cottons, the greatest, I'm going to say a name you know, Christophe Philippe Oberkampf, who founded the company for printing cottons from wooden blocks at Jouy, Jouy, however that is pronounced in French, near Versailles. So during the period of the ban on printed cottons, Oberkampf had traveled everywhere, learning all the complicated processes of dyeing and printing. When he was able to open up his factory, he employed the finest artists and engravers that it was possible to obtain. Unfortunately, in other factories of the time, the designs were made by engravers who were not artists. And while the printing was technically good, the design was uninteresting and many times artistically bad. So, for Oberkampf, splendid taste was shown in the patterns, the dainty flowers, the attractive stripes, and the whole composition of the design. The process of block printing at the Oberkampf factory is very interesting. First, the material was soaked in water to remove all foreign matter. Then it was mangled so that the surface was firm and smooth. And so a mangle, if you're not aware, if you've ever seen old-timey laundry stuff, you'll see them like putting things through like a roller situation. That's a mangle. It's basically squeezing water out and flattening and smoothing. And I think in the like the factory setting, these things I'm assuming could be quite huge. So I think this was something that Oberkampf, I don't know if he was like the inventor of these processes, but this is what he was doing. So the mangle was used to make sure it was smooth and firm, and it was taken from the mangle into the printing room where large blocks with the designs cut in high relief were ready. The dye or ink was placed upon the blocks by means of a roller, and a quick stroke of a large mallet drove the color into the fabric. A wringer? Yeah. Yeah. That's essentially like what, and I think the mangle in like a factory setting or a very large like laundry, like you imagine like the laundry for the Wayward Girls home or something, the prison, you've got lots of people, and I think those things they were much bigger and probably looked different, but oh, your grandmother had a wringer washing machine. That's wild. I want to say one of my grandmothers had something like that, but it was before I was born. And I don't know if it was something she actually used. I think it might have been my dad's mother. I've always seen those, and it's like I definitely know I had some relatives, down south that they had the wringer washing machine was like on their porch, because they didn't have anywhere else to put it. And yeah, I guess you take the stuff out of the tub and run it through that wringer. Yeah, the mangle is a much bigger piece of equipment. Okay, so they've rolled on the block, put it on the fabric, and they're using a large mallet to drive the color in. Large blocks were used for curtains, wall hangings, bedspreads, and furniture coverings, but the greatest demand was for small designs for dress material. A different block was used for each color. Yeah. Hey, nun maker. So sure, it's a mangle because that is what it does to your hands and arm, right? Yeah, and I think that these industrial like factory-sized things, I don't know how much of this stuff at that time, obviously, they didn't have electricity, but as far as like steam power and water power and stuff, I don't know how automated this stuff was. Can you stop it when it's like sucking fabric in and flattening and smoothing? Yeah. And yeah, I'm sure that's probably where, if it's not mangling your body parts, it's certainly mangling the fabric, right? The first press for printing cotton from copper plates was constructed at Jouy, in 1770. Instead of cutting the design on a wooden block, it was incised on a metal plate. This was then placed on a frame, which moved under an inked roller over a wooden structure from which it fell into a basket. This was printed near a furnace so that the ink would dry quickly. With the introduction of the copper plate, the technique of the designs changed. Line drawing took the place of large, free patterns of flowers and leaves. The new process was limited to a single color, and as a result, the toiles were monochromatic in blue, green, brown, rose, and mauve. Child labor, right? You could just probably mangle a whole child. And when I think about, child labor was a thing until the early 20th century in the US, and even in farms and stuff, until, still today, people's kids help out at farms, but, yeah, small children have done a lot of work, right? I suppose if you're leaning over your ringer or your mangle, you need to watch out for the front of you. Oh, your poor grandma. Oh my God, that cracks me up. So yes, I mentioned mauve because at this point in time, 1770, we don't actually have real mauve yet, right? So it's interesting that they're mentioning like that a purple color, a purplish or lavenderish color was used. And I'm curious to know like what kind of dye. Or we know that I think madder can create like a purplish color. So this is interesting. And I've seen all of these types of like old toile. I know a number of dealers, like quilt dealers, that also have fabrics like this. Depends on how many kids she had. It depends on, 10, okay. 8 kids, all right, yeah. Some of us, regardless of how many children we have, depending on the structural integrity of our brassiere. Danger, Will Robinson. Don't get too close to the laundry mangle. You guys are cracking me up today. Okay, the next invention, as she says, in printing was line engraving on metal cylinders, which were mounted on a calendaring frame. This roller printing machine could print over 5,400 yards of cotton a day, which was equivalent of the work of 42 block printers. The engraving of the cylinders by hand was a long process, but in 1801, a mechanical method of achieving this by means of steel points driven into the copper was invented. The material, once printed, was passed through the drying room, then soaked in water and put through the madder bath to fix the colors. It was soaked again, then spread out on the grass of the meadows to dry. Thus, when business was good, the fields around Joy blossomed out in brilliant colored cottons. That sounds so cool to me. Like, I'm sure the work was a lot, but then all of these swaths of fabric laid out to dry and, yeah, like a mimeograph. Yeah. She used an electric one, but still had one that could be cranked by hand. Even after she had a modern washer dryer, she hung her laundry out to dry. My grandmother did too. Yeah. Big sheets would be frozen, waving like solid walls from and that's interesting. Even in freezing weather, I'd always thought like you can't hang clothes outside when like it has to be warm enough that the water isn't freezing in the cloth. But from what I've understood, you can hang clothes out like that. And like it's like it does freeze, but then it like somehow like evaporates. I don't understand how like the science of this, but I have read this recently that you literally can hang your clothes out, and even if they freeze, they will still dry. And I'm I guess it's like you don't bring them in right when they're frozen. You let them stay frozen for a while, I guess. I was reading about this and I'm trying to remember now. I think it had something to do with just different ways that people dry clothes. Um, for instance, in Japan, and I don't know how widespread this is. I don't know. This may be like a special thing, or it may just be like something they're used to. Their bathrooms are actually set up in such a way, some of their bathrooms, that like when you close the door, it creates like a giant dryer, like, I mean, obviously there's not a tumbling, cylinder, but like the air, you can create this air, like, blow through or whatever with warm air, that where you can hang your clothes up in there, and then in the bathroom will dry them. Like I said, I don't know if that's like a novelty thing or something, like, only the rich people have, or maybe it's the only the poor people have. I don't know. Also, I know in Europe, and especially like in Germany, I know they have this a lot. But I've seen it also in the hotels in England, and I think even when I was in Eastern Europe, there might have been like one or two places that I saw them. But essentially, they're towel dryers, but they're also, you can put other things on them. They're pretty hot. They get pretty hot. So you think about a radiator, or you think about like baseboard heat. But it's just like a big metal rack, and it's made out of tubes that are hollow, and I'm guessing it's water, like it's a closed circuit with water pumping through. And I'm thinking it makes the most sense if it is in a place that like has like hot water baseboards or radiators. It's all one big system, and they can just kind of plug the towel rack into it. But yeah, like what a fantastic thing. And I think you can turn them on and off. And I guess they're electric ones too, but like again, the ones I saw when I was traveling were, it literally looks like a giant shiny ladder on the bathroom wall, and with just enough room to like hang stuff over each rung. Um, I got to tell you hang your towel over that before your completely dry towel. Hang that over there, hang it on there, go take your shower, grab your towel off of that warming or drying rack. It is also a warming rack. Fantastic. It is like it is like nothing else. um I very much enjoyed having those racks. All right, so let's see, where have I left off? All right, so how joy was blossoming with these brilliant colored cottons. And this reminds me, there's so many other places where large pieces of cloth would be laid out to dry. I actually have a lecture by a friend up in New England. She works for Historical Society in one of the barrier islands up in Rhode Island, and she has done a lot of research on something called shipwreck cloth. And it's literally ships coming from England, or maybe other parts of the U.S. coming, up, into New England. If they wrecked, sometimes their cargo would be spilling out, and cloth would be washing up on the shore. And so there was a spot, kind of a high spot on the island, and it became known as Calico Hill, because when this shipwreck cloth would come up, they would, drag it up there and spread it out so that it would dry. I mean, what a cool thing. I mean, unfortunate for the shipwreck, of course, but but yeah, for it to become called Calico Hill, because they often enough had fabric spread out up there. All right. So popular did the toiles become that many notable people visited the factory, and among these were Napoleon and the Empress Josephine. Napoleon inspected the roller printing machine, the presses for printing from copper plates, and the department of wood block printing. Josephine was more interested in the fabrics themselves, and as a souvenir of her visit, she ordered some cotton prints. One of the big discoveries in the textile world was made in Joy in 1810, when it was found that the color green could be printed with a copper plate on a roller in a single operation. Dun, dun, dun. Previously, green of any fastness had to be made by 2 consecutive applications: indigo blue on yellow, or yellow on indigo blue. Oberkampf was awarded the grand prize given every 10 years to the founder of an establishment most useful to the industry, and this solid green color ranked first in the report of the jury. After a second visit to the factory, this time with Empress Marie Therese, Napoleon ordered boxes of the finest Indiennes, so again, these Indian print cottons, sent to members of the court. While speaking to Oberkampf, Napoleon is said to have remarked, "You and I wage a good war on the English, you by your industry and I by my armies, but yours is the more effective." That's interesting. You would never think that I just picture Napoleon. Well, I mean, the things we hear about Napoleon and his Napoleon complex. Many more large patterns in monotone were now designed, and among them the following well-known scenes taken from fables. Oh gosh, I cannot even begin to pronounce these. Les Meuniers sans fil et lang, Les Quatre Saisons, and Lafite Villageois. That one perhaps is the Festival of the Villagers. I don't know. So aside from those three terrible pronunciations, there were many others engraved on very large copper plates by well-known artists of the day at a proportionally high price, and all achieved notoriety for joy. But the main work of the factory was still the Indienne print for dress material, and this is what made Oberkampf's fortune. And of course, we read about Oberkampf in he came up both in the Chintz book as well as the Heritage of Cotton. He's a big name. The most gifted and the most prolific of the decorative printers of the 18th century was Jean-Baptiste Huet, who designed for Oberkampf for many years. His first pattern, designed in 1783, was the copperplate Les Travaux de la Manufacture, on which the artist represented, in picturesque and cleverly distributed groups, the various phases of the industry. And we've actually seen this before. I think this one was in... I don't think it was either in the Chintz book or the Heritage of Cotton. It was in a book that we have seen, though. I will never remember at this very moment, but we've definitely seen this before because it's a big deal that, that there was this fabric literally showed all of the steps involved in this fabric manufacture, which is so very meta, right? Included are scenes of bleaching, dyeing, block printing, the preparation of the colors, the copperplate printing, the little village of Joy with its church, the mill for calendaring, the designer himself, and the proprietor Oberkampf walking with his son. Even the bell used by Oberkampf for calling the employees to work appears. Huet had two distinct styles of decorating this particular toile. He had two distinct styles of decorating. So this particular toile, I'm not going to try to pronounce this, represents the first, in which detached scenes were scattered over a space with small motifs filling in the open spaces. The second was a style in which he framed his figures in scrolls of foliage combined with arabesques. And I'm sure you could probably imagine these. I mean, if you think about like common, the common toiles that you'd see like in today's, shabby chic, cottage core kind of, those are all those little pastoral scenes. And then you've got the ones that are like, it's almost like a little vignette that has like little garlands and scrolly junk on it. So they look a little bit different. I can picture like specific prints that I've seen either in quilts or in, antique textile, dealers that have this stuff. So it's kind of like I can picture it just because I've seen it. So they provide some examples of this, or his, I'm not going to try to pronounce it. It's something de Quatre Saisons and L'Hommage de Amérique à la France. Is that the homage to American France? I don't know. He enjoyed depicting dogs, cats, fowls, rabbits, wolves, foxes, doves, goats, sheep, cows, and horses. I feel like we see a lot of these animals in the pastoral scenes. There are several very interesting copper plates which depict American subject matter, such as L'Hommage de l'Amérique à la France, in which American Indians, amusingly to us, wear ostrich plumes as headgear. Okay, that's weird. Hewitt took great interest in architectural style, which was very fashionable in the design of this period. He framed his new designs in geometric forms, circles, ovals, and other medallions. Le Loup et l'Agneau is an example. So that's the wolf. What is agneau? A sheep? A lamb? I don't know. The wolf and something. After the death of Hewitt, several other artists tried to follow his style. Among these was Hippolyte Labros. He put the figures into medallions and geometric designs. Another artist was Pinelli, who designed the famous Toiles de Signes Romanis and Monuments de Paris, or de Paris. Oberkampf's contribution to textiles was so great that his style has been revived time and time again. It is often said that there would have been something lacking in the 18th century if it were not for the printed cottons of joy, with the brilliance and gaiety of the prints strewn with ribbons and flowers. And that is the end of that section. So let's get started on part 4, because there's a just kind of an intro section, and then if you remember, I think I told you guys that there are like several pages of these different quilt pattern names. So we'll skip over that. But let me change the picture here because we've been looking at this for a while, and let's see if they're I'm trying to remember now what the next one is. Yeah, so we have this. All right, come on. Here we go. This pretty little one. You know, and these they don't really have anything to do with kind of what she's talking about. I mean, these look far more modern than this really old stuff she's talking about. But I just think these little illustrations are so charming. I mean, this looks like a cut and paste kind of thing. And the little birds did too. The birds in the basket. So, all right. So this section we're starting now is part 4, Sources of Design in the American Quilt and the Quilt Names. The early American quilt was made for a very practical reason, to provide warmth. Not really. So, this is, I think, this idea of yes, they were made for beds. They were not necessarily made to be used per se. So it was at the very, very beginning, we know that when we've got settlers first coming, colonists first coming, they are not using quilts generally, unless they have brought something from England or from the British Isles. We had weavers here in the U.S. first, and so a lot of times warmth was obtained from woven wool blankets. And then as the quilts became kind of a thing, it's generally those whole cloth quilts, those beautiful whole cloth quilts from England. They're doing those, and the chintz stuff. And those really, really early quilts are generally, they are a show of, beautiful, fine things. We don't get this, I need to make a quilt to keep my family warm until we've got some expansion going on. The very first settlers here were either too poor for quilts or too rich for quilts that keep you warm. And so I think that the early American quilt being practical, I think is kind of it's a misconception. I think we've kind of cleared this up at this point. So sorry, Elizabeth, you're wrong. Nevertheless, during their long evenings, quilt makers began putting as much design as they could into their work. In the pieced quilts, designs with sharp corners and geometric forms were the most common. In applique, silhouette was usual, and because the quilts were for the most part made from tiny pieces, all-over patterns were used. Most of these quilt makers had no training in art, but they knew from ordinary life experience how to coordinate the activity of hand and eye. Some of the earliest quilt makers, however, had studied in the sewing schools in England and knew beautiful stitchery. Besides this, many of the colonists were well aware of the exquisite beauty of articles made for the English aristocracy. So, again, this is your higher echelon people that are aware of these things. Crewel was a well known form of stitchery on curtains, bedspreads, and chair seats. This exquisite handiwork was only for those with money enough to buy wide linen cloth and the expensive, softly colored woolen yarns. Woolen yarns. It was a far cry from the luxurious material and meticulous stitches of the embroidery of the leisurely ladies of the English court to the quilts of the hardworking American colonial women. But the urge must have been the same, regardless of means. For in the very earliest quilts, we often find very fine stitches on the crude homespun material. So again, this is when, you've got kind of set colonies and then you've got a little bit of expansion going on. This is when, what she's talking about is coming up, is being seen. The Pilgrims and the Puritans. Okay, so are Pilgrims and Puritans not the same thing? Riddle me that, you guys. Aren't those like the same words? Don't just refer to the same people? Pilgrims, Puritans, aren't they the same? They were far from a gay people. No, they were not. Gay in the fun sense or gay in the homosexual sense? Who knows? Hence, they chose subdued colors for their dresses. So yeah, I think the Puritans, yes. This accounts for the many pieces of brown and gray calico in the early quilts. These people were bound to a severe and simple way of life and preferred correspondingly simple designs. I think some of that is maybe a little bit, certainly, yes. I think in New England we had, oh, Druid has the intel for us. Okay, so Pilgrims are separatists and Puritans are reformers. Both sought religious freedom from the Church of England, but differed in approach. Okay. So Pilgrims are of Plymouth, 1620, completely broke away from the church, while Puritans, 1630s, Massachusetts, aimed to reform it from within. Pilgrims were smaller, working class, and flexible, whereas Puritans were larger, wealthier, and more controlling. Fascinating. Okay. I was today years old when I found out there was a difference between a Pilgrim and a Puritan. That is amazing. I had no idea. Well, thank you, Elizabeth, for bringing that up. So we could find this out. I feel like a dummy. I feel like I should have known this, but I did not. Interesting. Okay. Either way, separatists or reformers, yes, it makes sense. They are they're wearing brown and gray a lot and had buckles on their hats and shoes. That's got to be the Pilgrims, right? As in all folk art, the sources of design of early quilts were based on objects of use and of everyday association for which the people had great affection. They cut bits of cotton cloth into shapes of familiar objects or into shapes which somehow best express their thoughts and feelings of the moment. From the very fact that these early craftsmen put, so to speak, their life experiences into these designs, indeed, from the fact that they express what they felt rather than what they actually saw, they may be said to be the forerunners of modern design. Interesting. That's a cool way to look at it. I mean, yeah, they were definitely, yeah, modern design. Interesting. Contrary to popular myth, neither group wore large silver buckles on their hats or shoes. As these were costly and not fashionable in the early 1600s, they instead wore practical clothing, often colored with leather shoes. Yes. I think that has definitely been long ago debunked. But my gosh, from a cartoon sense or, like an iconic sense, when you think of a pilgrim, do you not think of that sort of little lopped off conical hat with the big buckle and the buckles on their shoes? Oh my goodness, too funny. Okay. It is interesting to note that every woman then and now who loved quilts also loved her garden. Well, no, I'm sorry, Elizabeth, that's not true. I love quilts. I don't have a garden, and I don't love to garden. This may be due to the fact that she liked to see a bouquet of color on her beds in the dead of winter, reminding her of the flowers which she cultivated so carefully during the summer in the garden or in her dooryard. Um, I'm flippant there. I do know many quilters do love gardening. Um, I mean, I guess when I think about like the crossover hobbies, I mean, certainly all the quilters I know, certainly there's many who do other types of needlework, including like knitting and crochet and the heirloom needlework and embroidery and cross stitch and all that stuff. But I would say if I had to just rip something out of my best guess, I would say gardening is probably, like the next most common pastime of quilters. I feel like I meet so many quilters that are like, yes, I am inspired. My quilts inspire my gardening, and my gardening inspires my quilting, et cetera, et cetera. So I might be an outlier. Nature, always the greatest source of design, provided most of the basic forms that were used. Trees, leaves, and vines, also birds, animals, moths. That's interesting that she chooses to say moths. Flowers and butterflies. Other nature forms which appeared in quilt designs were stars and the sun. The elements, too, were introduced by individual representations of the wind, snow, and clouds. The lives and customs of the early settlers themselves were sources of design. Religion, for instance, was a very strong force, and biblical references were found in many quilt names. We certainly know that. The colonial women were devout students of the Bible. Also, because it affected them directly, they were well aware of what was going on in politics. If the women of today learn their politics in club meetings and at bridge parties, the colonial women can be said literally to have sewn their politics into their quilts. Party loyalty was as strong among the women as it was among the men. And I think that's really interesting that she's mentioning that. And there was something she said, and it's, of course, stretching out the reading of this book is the problem. But I want to say it's like right there in the very beginning in the first chapter, she really does. She talks about like the agency of these women. And it really surprised me as a woman herself writing at this time period, 1940s, and recognizing the agency of women at this time or their lack of agency and what they did to deal with that, because they did have opinions and they were, for the most part, I don't want to say well read necessarily, but they were well informed, and they just weren't allowed to cast their vote. So it's interesting to me that she must have been such a feminist. That's the vibe I get from her. She must have been a very independent woman, and she's putting her head there, with these women that even if they could not vote, still, had strong feelings and strong opinions, and infused that into their needlework, whether it was obvious or not. I like Elizabeth. I think she would have gotten along pretty well with us. So this is just a little intro to all of these names. And oh my gosh, the page with the roses and the tulips, the list is just huge. So this says, proper names are to be found in many of the quilts. There were names of the women or girls who made the quilts, or the names of the friends to whom they were to be given. Fun appeared as inspiration for designs, and games and puzzles found their way into patterns. Occupations, also tools connected with occupations, and trades appeared as names. And we can all think of, these, sit and think, you can come up with these. A classification of quilt designs originating from a variety of sources is given under the respective group heads or names. And so this, let me just show you, because like I said, I'm not going to read it because it's a lot and it's boring. But this is what I'm talking about. Like, they're just literally like the phone book of names of quilt blocks. She does have them in sections, and she's got the alphabet, baskets, birds, bushes and shrubs, flowers. Flowers is huge. Fruits, games and puzzles, geometrics, insects, leaves, miscellaneous. Miscellaneous is 2 pages wide. Nature, animals, plants, politics and place names, also a really big section. Proper names, religion, seeds, shells and fish, social, stars. Stars looks like it's longer than flowers. Stones, sun, the elements, trees, vines, and reeds. So yeah. Okay, I'll read this last little section and then I think we're going to wrap up for today. So as time went on and new friends were made, materials and patterns were exchanged and old designs were given new names. Something that's so important to remember. And I remember when I was younger and my mom was heavily involved in the quilting world, and she made her own patterns and things. And not that I went to many guild meetings or anything with my mom, but I do remember just being privy to conversations, and I could not have cared less. But when you're a kid, you just kind of take in information. And I remember there being arguments, like quilt police type arguments, like, oh, no, this pattern is called this, or this block is called that. And the thing is, I think particularly Barbara Brackman's Encyclopedia of Quilt Block Names, I think it has shown us that there are the regional names, and some of those, Road to blank, we're the pioneers going out west. So we've got Road to California and Road to Kansas, Road to wherever they were going. I think Rocky Road to Kansas is one. And so it's just kind of like the people decide. And then there's things that were shared or sprung up independently that they name different things. And then there's the newspaper, and the newspaper gets involved in the early 20th century. Sometimes they're using the proper names for these things, the names that the women who designed these quilt patterns, the names they gave them. But most of the time, they were just coming up with some other random name that they wanted to use. The newspaper was just like, call it whatever. So, yeah, that's something I think is really important to keep in mind. And, when you're trying to describe a quilt block or pattern to someone, or you're trying to find it, it's helpful to remember that not all names are perfectly descriptive, and not all names are going to be the same. So I don't know if I've ever I'm sure I know I've recommended to you guys, if you're interested in getting this deep into it, that Barbara Brackman's encyclopedias are, her encyclopedia, the primary one. There's one for applique as well, but it's probably not, I don't want to say it's not useful, because it is, but I think applique is so very loosey goosey, whereas pieced blocks are a little bit more, have, the trappings of the grid around them. And they're a little bit more easy to figure out. But you will see from her book, her encyclopedia, that, one block might be called a whole bunch of stuff. And that gets frustrating, except if you carefully read her encyclopedia, the whole first chapter explains to you how to figure it out. And it's something that we discovered along with Mary Fawn's. Barbara Brackman's encyclopedia has more value than just paging through and going, I'm looking for a flower. But there's a method to the madness. And I think it's really helpful to learn that system. And you can get copies of her, earlier editions of her encyclopedia. I think it's on the 3rd edition now, but you can get early editions of the encyclopedia, and it's not like she went and changed a whole bunch of stuff. So they're pretty consistent. And they're not terribly expensive. And I think it's worth it just to kind of have in your back pocket, the variety of names that have been attributed, So, all right, let me finish this paragraph. So let's see. Patterns were exchanged and old designs were given new names. This is especially true of the many star patterns. Ruth Finley points out that one quilt, which she called Indian Trail, was also called Forest Path, Winding Walk, Rambling Road, Climbing Rose, Old Maid's Ramble, Storm at Sea, Flying Dutchman, North Wind, Weather Vane, Tangled Terrors, Tares, Tangled Terrors, Prickly Pear, and Just Puzzle. And I'm trying to even figure out, like, some of these I think I can kind of, Flying Dutchman is the one that kind of sticks in my head, is like, I think I can kind of picture it. The North Carolina Lily was one of the quilt names that changed frequently as well. When people moved west, new names appeared in the quilts, such as Kansas Troubles, Road to California, Rocky Road to Kansas, Star of the West, Texas, Texas Rose, Texas Treasure, and Ohio Rose. So I'm going to leave off there. Derivative Designs is next. I don't even know where she's going to go with this. Oh, it looks like she's going to be talking about, like, how people are inspired by their designs. So other decorative things. This could be a very interesting section. I don't know. I kind of stumble over the way that Elizabeth Robertson writes sometimes. Sometimes the structure of her sentences is kind of hard to narrate. She was a teacher, right? So, but I like her. I like where her head is at. I feel like, of, all of the people we've read, she may not be as snarky and sassy and funny as some of them, but I do think, like, she's kind of plugged into kind of this mentality that, I don't know, is a little more empowered and forward thinking, I feel. So, I don't know. I'm going to have to sort of boost my research on her. I don't know what happened to her. Presumably she, I don't think she ever married. Presumably she lived a long life and passed away at some point. I think she was sort of middle-aged when she wrote this. So, she may have been in her 40s or 40s when she wrote. Oh, it's terrible to say. 30s is middle-aged now. It's not. Let's say 40s. She was in her 40s when she wrote this, maybe. And I think she lived a long life. So she didn't pass away until, like, the 70s or later. So, yeah, I'm going to have to find out more about her, because she continues to interest me. All right. So, as I said, y'all, you know what's up this weekend. I'm not going to pester you about it anymore. If you want to come, if you're interested, go to the AQSG website, AmericanQuiltStudyGroup.org. Go to events. You'll see all of the stuff about Winter Virtual. That is what I will be doing all weekend, beginning tonight and tomorrow night, and then all day Saturday and Sunday. Coming off of that, I am planning on Monday to, hey, word nerd, I didn't know you were lurking out there. So yeah, I'm planning on doing the rest of the community outreach quilts, the blue colorway, on Monday. That's the plan. So unless something really fascinating happens this weekend that I must tell you about. But yeah, and then we'll get into this derivation of designs. I'm interested to hear what she has to say. So that said, y'all have a wonderful weekend. I hope to see you there. I'll see Word and Bird Nerd. And if I don't see you, I'll see you on Monday. And we also have who knows what for quilt nerding next week, because we're still in between books. So I hope wherever you are, it is not 80 degrees today and snowing tomorrow, which is generally what has happened to me this week. Absolutely crazy. Not false spring. It is spring with some bizarre snow is what it is. All right. Love you guys bunches. I'll see you soon. Mwah.